O assunto agora é identidade digital. Mais de 1 bilhão de pessoas não têm identidade no mundo, o que, no âmbito dos governos, significa a falta de serviços essenciais para todas essas pessoas. No mundo digital, por outro lado, grandes empresas possuem os dados pessoais de milhares de pessoas ao redor do mundo, ou seja, uma verdadeira mina de informação. A menor distância entre dois pontos não é uma reta, mas um clique. A burocracia nos atrasa, dificulta a inovação e é um desestímulo para a participação. Contra todos esses problemas, uma única solução. Identidade digital. Diminui a burocracia, aumenta a transparência, promove qualidade nos serviços e potencializa a democracia. Bom, convido ao palco novamente Ronaldo Lemos, fundador do ITS Rio. Podem bater palma, gente. A PhD em Física e participante do programa e-Democracia do e-Governance Academy, que promove o uso de tecnologia da informação e comunicação para uma governança democrática e o empoderamento dos cidadãos, Lia Rani. O defensor da abertura e transparência na sociedade, especialista em identidades digitais soberanas e membro do conselho da Sorvin Foundation, Antti Poikola. E para moderar o papo, convido ao palco o presidente da Acesso Digital, que é uma das empresas mais inovadoras do país. Seu propósito é proteger a identidade dos brasileiros e facilitar suas relações com as empresas. Com vocês, Diego Martins.
Boa tarde. Acredito que esse painel vai ser super rico, porque eu acho que é uma visão diferente sobre como aplicar identidades digitais. A Lia tem uma visão e uma experiência muito grande com o governo da Estônia, que a gente teve aqui o privilégio de ouvir o presidente. O Antti tem uma visão que, na minha perspectiva, é super inovadora, de como as pessoas poderão criar sua própria identidade em plataformas tecnológicas mundo afora, dando liberdade para o próprio cidadão fazer a sua identidade. Ronaldo, com a sua bagagem intelectual aí sobre o tema, e eu com uma experiência com a iniciativa privada. Da mesma forma que os governos têm grandes problemas com vários órgãos, cada empresa hoje no país também cria sua própria identidade, cria sua própria burocracia, e a gente, de alguma forma, está tentando ajudar as empresas a unificar as suas identidades. Eu trouxe aqui, antes de passar a palavra para a Lia, alguns dados do quanto impacta a falta de identidade na perspectiva privada, que, por consequência, aumenta o custo do país. A gente tem um caso muito clássico aqui em São Paulo, que hoje é mais burocrático e demorado ser contratado numa empresa como funcionário do que abrir uma empresa. Você tem que apresentar tantos documentos e leva tanto tempo que você acaba tendo uma burocracia maior aqui no município de São Paulo de você abrir uma empresa. O sistema financeiro provavelmente tem 20% da inadimplência do custo do spread bancário vem de falsidade ideológica, por conta dos vários RGs que são emitidos Brasil afora. E um outro dado super importante, quando você vai comprar um veículo aqui no país, se pede mais de 80 dados sobre você, e, na verdade, precisaria apenas de um, que é o CPF, para tomar a decisão de crédito, sendo que 79 desses campos é para você identificar se realmente você é você mesmo. Então, O custo da burocracia na perspectiva da iniciativa privada também é muito alto, pela falta de uma identidade única, inclusive na própria iniciativa privada. Então, tem a questão pública, que foi muito discutida, mas a gente também tem um custo país por conta do mercado não ter essa padronização. Bom, vou passar para a Lia, depois para o Ante, e já emendo com uma pergunta em seguida para o Ronaldo, já que ele acabou de terminar a apresentação dele, se na visão dele o maior desafio do Brasil é construir a identidade ou desconstruir as várias entidades e órgãos que existem por conta da falta de. Então, a gente tem um Popotempo, a gente tem cartórios, você tem N entidades no governo brasileiro que, por falta da identidade, você tem uma grande estrutura. Então, a pergunta para ele é se é mais desafiador criar ou desconstruir essas entidades que sumiriam com uma identidade digital quando o Brasil tiver isso. Então, passo primeiro para a Lia.
So, thank you. Difficult task for me to speak here after my president, Thomas Hendrik Ilves. I decided not to show my slides I prepared for this conference because there are just the same information he told you already. But honestly speaking, of course I am proud, I am Estonian, but also a bit feeling uncomfortable because I feel you may have a wrong picture about our digital journey. That it was like our smart politicians having strategy and then implementing to get e-government as a platform. I am somehow insider of this process of e-Estonia development since I was a member of parliament when we passed most important legislation to allow digital identity, digital signature. But it was not like a planned journey. It was also learning by doing. We actually passed the first strategy for informatization of Estonia. It was in 1998, and it was a very general document just describing the understanding of parliament and parliamentarians, what we need to do. It was to improve and to change our laws to allow information society to be developed in Estonia. It was about our understanding that somehow we need to alter or to change the interaction between state and citizens. And it was extremely important that we had this citizen-centric view from the very beginning. My president already mentioned the important law on digital signature. It was 2000 when Parliament passed this law. We were very proud, we applauded because we felt we have done something very innovative. But actually nothing happened after this law was passed. The issue was that we described theoretically and legally the ecosystem as we call it now. But there was a missing piece in this ecosystem, and it was a document which can be used to say and to approve our digital identity. And then a moment came when there were some smart people in our government, maybe not politicians, but experts, who said, in Estonia, we need to replace our identity document we issued when we restored our independence. These documents were valid for 10 years, and time was over in 2002 for some of these documents, so we needed to replace the documents. And then the idea was that we should have a digital component installed in these ID cards. And I was one of those 3 members of parliament who initiated the draft law, like an urgent matter, to be able to include digital certificates into Estonian ID card. It was a beginning of Estonian very famous digital identity 2-in-1, because we still have our photos in this ID card, and so we can use this also like a travel document in the European Union countries. But it was a smart decision in the sense that our population needed to change their documents. Digital ID card was made obligatory. And I remember these political debates, why we need this kind of digital part of our ID card, what kind of services the government will offer. And there was no answer to all these questions. But there was a vision that probably our society will use more technology, internet, having computers. In future, we need this digital part of our ID card. One idea was, and like a proposal, let's make it not an obligatory, not a mandatory, but people who want to have digital identity, let them to decide, do people need identity, digital identity or not? It would have been a very bad decision, because then you have inbuilt digital divide in your society. We decided to make it like mandatory from 15 years age. Every Estonian citizen and resident needs to have a digital ID card. Although it was mandatory, and it is mandatory, there was no punishment for people if they decided not to hurry and to take digital identity. Our methodology was different. To develop digital services so that people will see that it's very useful to have this digital ID card. So step by step, we developed this kind of systems which allowed citizens to use very convenient digital services. There is another famous system coming from Estonia called X-Road. It's a system which ensures interoperability of different data sets. Although it was not like academic project to have a X-Road and interoperability system like we have. It was necessity because different government agencies had their own information system, not compatible with each other. And there should be like a system which allows to exchange data between different databases. And now it's a very well-known system. We apply and help other countries to implement this kind of X-Road system we have in Estonia, which uses very secure exchange of information between different information systems. So it was like learning by doing and making some right decision at the right moment. And I think also now when there is almost like a cookbook of e-government, I think still different countries, different nations need to take like into account their situation as it is. And I'm very glad that in your country you have studied your situation, and it's like a precondition to find the best solution to go forward. Often when we talk to other countries how it was done in Estonia, how to build up digital identity, and this is what my organization, E-Government Academy, is doing now. We provide advice not to start from internet voting as we did in Estonia. It is somehow funny story that one of the first digital services for democracy in Estonia was internet voting. But it was somehow to have this high standard, to put our target high, and to convince our people that if you are able to vote securely online, you can use also other digital services online. And these basic principles we have now, which support this digital life in Estonia, are, of course, once only. Government is not allowed to ask our data several times, different agencies, but it also requires interoperability of our information system. The other important principle is the protection of privacy. And privacy protection in Estonia is ensured by having this nice cryptographic systems, how to make our information traveling in the internet secure and integral, not that anyone can get it. But the important is that we also can see who has been interested to use our data. This is like somehow not exactly the modern system, but it still gives a confidence for citizens that they know how government is using our data. And now to summarize this experience of Estonia, it's not so much about like technology, modern technology. It is more about the process of building partnership between government, businesses, and of course citizens, who are the main users and the winners from the system we have. There are, of course, figures that Estonia has. We have economy 2% of GDP because of digital signatures. Actually, you can Google and find a platform where you can calculate the benefit from digital signature for your companies. The life is nice, but we have new challenges, and several of them actually. First of all, there may be some kind of risks hidden in our system, as we had last autumn, where there was a vulnerability of our digital identity because of some software production we had. We were able to solve it, but the lesson learned was that we need to be as open as possible about the possible risks. And so Estonian people trusted government, and despite of these theoretical risks, many people participated and voted online. The second risk we also need to calculate and to take into account is not to create online bureaucracy. If you have an information platform which is very hard to use by people, you have additional online bureaucracy, not a human interaction, and therefore we need to raise the citizen friendliness of our information, different e-services as well. And thirdly, we should also pay attention to what kind of changes in our everyday life actually this use of technology brings. It affects almost all spheres of life, our labor, our education system. And this disruptive change should be foreseen if we develop our digital society. And I wish you every success to be successful. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I may have some slides. I'm Antti Poikala-Joki from Finland. Hello also for who is seeing this from online. I come from an organization called Sovereign Foundation, which is a non-for-profit, international non-for-profit that is bringing brand new, fundamentally changing technology to the world called self-sovereign identity. We already heard about a little bit about that earlier. There are other organizations doing the same. Do I have my slides here? Okay. So let's see what comes out. By the way, it's very nice to be here presenting the Nordics, Estonia and Finland in full force. I still don't know how to get the slides there. Hmm? Okay. Well, I sent it by email earlier. So as we are tight in timing, I'm not going to wait for my slides, but I'm going to start easy. So, by the way, I do speak also Portuguese. So posso falar português, mas vou dar uma palestra em inglês. É meio técnico. Self-sovereign identity. In Portuguese is identidade autossoberana. And I bet that most of you have not heard about it. Raise your hand if you have heard about it. Yes, I guessed correctly. That's good. So it means that you haven't also read the text that Ronaldo wrote in the Folha de Sao Paulo 2 weeks ago. He mentioned it. But I think it's now time to bring this new technology to the knowledge of Brazilians, because as we heard these stories, for example, from Estonia, it was back already almost 20 years ago when you started to do that, and that time the technology was really different. And we have heard about the stories like the biggest problem of internet is really the lack of identity layer, so to say. There was the picture of the comic from the 90s that in internet nobody knows that you are a dog. And that problem has been chasing us. I'm from the technological background, so it has been really hard to solve. Internet has boosted in economical terms, and lots of development has happened, but the identity problem is not easy to solve. And I wanted to start easy, but for this I need my slides really, because there are pictures from children's book. So it's a book called, or a children's book from Austria. I copied the idea of this story from one of the self-sovereign identity gurus, Marcus Sabarello. So he's from Austria, Vienna, and this is one of the children's book from 1970s. And it tells a story about this colorful creature here, animal, very cute animal, who has a kind of identity problem. She doesn't know what kind of animal she is. She doesn't know even her name. She lives her life nicely in the home forest, and no problem, no need to go to government offices to show any documents, and she was happy without knowing who she is. But one day there came a frog, and the frog asked, "Who are you? Who are you? I've never seen this creature so weird." And the little animal was like staring the frog's eyes. "I don't know. Who am I? Can you help me?" And frog was like laughing. "Don't you know who you are? Don't you know even what animal you are?" And the little creature got a little bit sad, but she decided that I need to go out from my home forest to find out who am I. Find some teacher who can tell who am I really. So, "Hello, horse. Can you help me? I want to know who am I. I have a tail like you, so maybe I'm a horse." Well, the horse looks, "Yes, you definitely have a tail, but no, you are not a horse. Nobody can mix you with a horse." So the little animal didn't get disappointed. She continued and asked from the fishes, "Can you help me to find out who am I?" And fishes were like, "Well, you can definitely swim, but no, you are not a fish." So the story goes on, and the animal goes to see papagayos and cachorros and other animals. And everybody tells that, "I don't know who you are. You look bizarre, but don't know who you are." And the little creature started to get really kind of sad and depressed that maybe I don't even exist. Do I exist? And in a moment of enlightenment, she got it like, of course I exist. I am me. So this is a book from Mira Lopez and Susie Weigel. You can see the story from YouTube. It gives for young children like 4 years, 3 years old, a really important lecture that what is to be individual in this world, what is to have your own identity, which is independent of anybody else. It doesn't matter what the other children in the daycare tell or what other people tell. So it's really you. It's you, and you have the identity, even if the government of Brazil would not be able to give you the credential card. So you are you. But how to say in internet that I am me? That's the problem that has been haunting the technologies for a couple of decades now. And that's where a self-sovereign identity is the solution that is only now in the late couple of years being possible. So in a nutshell, self-sovereign identity is permanent digital identity for any person, organization, or a thing. I mean, my car could have an identity, why not? And most importantly, that does not depend any centralized authority. It does not depend on Google or Facebook or my university or the government. So it's really my identity. And there are 3 things that make this self-sovereign identity possible nowadays, which was not possible before. So this is really about technological advancement. And now when Brazil is thinking about laying out the identity system for the future for 200 million people, I think it's not good to only look on the back mirror what happened before. There are good lectures, but technology is moving very fast. So now it's time to grasp what we have here. So first of all, the blockchain, distributed ledger technologies, that's something that is rather new. I mean, Satoshi Nakamoto made the paper of Bitcoin in 2008 or 9, and that was the same time when the European Union started to draft the new legislation for the General Data Protection Regulation that came out this year, finally. So in this time, the technology has been running super fast. And what the distributed ledger technologies enable is that the digital identity can be based on network that nobody controls alone. It's not the network controlled by government, it's not a network controlled by Google or Facebook. It's distributed, and you can plant your digital identity in that distributed network. And there are 2 important, actually, standards coming up about decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. And it's important to make the separation. What is the identifier? It's some sort of number, basically. It doesn't tell anything about you. But the credentials, on the other hand, I got one. Now I need more hands, but this is the Finnish passport. So it's a credential that the Finnish government has given me. And this doesn't need to be digital. It can work in the physical world as well. And this is verifiable, so that I got it from the Finnish police. And when I came, I'm having here, I'm the holder of my credential. It's in my hand. It's really in my hand. So when I have it in my hand, I can give it to your hand. So here it is. I'm not giving it to you. But for example, when I checked into this hotel, I was showing my passport. And they saw my name, and I could check into the hotel. But what did they do? They did not do. They didn't call to the Finnish police. Hello, here is this Antti Poikola coming to the hotel. Can we let him in? Because we don't want that kind of things happening. It's not happening in the physical world, but in the digital infrastructures, it's a very typical problem that it's kind of call home problem. We don't want to replicate that in the digital world. So for that to be possible to do, the decentralized identifiers and distributed ledger technologies are important. I'm not going to the details, but I just ran through one example from a company from UK called TrueID, and they are creating this system for doctors. So The issuers of credentials in this case is a medical license authority. So they check that you have done your studies to be a doctor, and they issue a digital credential. So it's a piece of, they don't give you a passport like that, but they give a little bit of data that you can hold in your digital wallet. And when they give this credential, they sign it cryptographically, and that's put into the distributed ledger. And when I get the credential, I also sign it. And it's important to note that my personal data is not going to any public ledger. I get the data as a credential to my wallet. And then when the new doctor wants to go and apply for a job from hospital, she says, here I have my credential of being a doctor. It's given by the medical license authority. Is it okay for you to hire me? Well, the hospital checks from the ledger that the signatures are matching. So they don't need to call back to the medical license authority. They check it from the existing ledger. And that makes it decentralize the system. Okay, yes, you are a doctor, fine, let's hire you. That was the example. Now, I very quickly, I didn't say much what Sovereign is doing here, because this is all based on open standards that many other organizations are actually using. So there are decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials are being standardized in W3C right now. And we already heard earlier from Consensus that they are having the Uport product that is based on distributed ledger called Ethereum. And Sovereign is using the same standards, but using a different distributed ledger. And we are using one that is maintained by the Linux Foundation in the project called Hyperledger Indy. And Sovereign is taking that into use and building what we call trust framework on that. So to put a little bit of difference, there is, for example, Bitcoin and Ethereum, which are more well-known distributed ledgers. They are public and permissionless. It means that if I want to set up a node, I can run my computer and become part of the network. Sovereign ledger is permissioned, so that it's not like anybody could start running a node in that network, but we have what we call sovereign stewards. These are organizations that around the world are joining to make this sovereign network work. There is one that is in Brazil, Certisign, and one that is from Finland, Aalto University. This is my home university. My time is running out, so I'm wrapping up here and moving to the discussions. But just as a last thought, I think that with self-sovereign identity, we are now like we were in with the web in 1993. Nobody knows about it, but it's going to be big in the future. Thank you. Muito obrigado.
Ronaldo, acho que emendando e voltando um pouquinho para a pergunta inicial, você acredita que o Brasil tem como principal desafio a construção ou a desconstrução das estruturas atuais que gerenciam todas as identidades que a gente tem?
Olha, eu sou contra duplicar qualquer tipo de esforço se ele for desnecessário. Então, eu acho que a primeira coisa que precisa ser feita é um pouco do que a gente está fazendo aqui, que é um diagnóstico. E eu acho que o Brasil tem avanços, eu acho que a gente já fez muita coisa. A coleta de dados biométricos é um exemplo, e tem várias outras coisas que eu acho que o país já está trabalhando. Por exemplo, o cadastro único, a infraestrutura do próprio ITI, que a gente tem o presidente aqui conosco hoje, o presidente Gastão, é uma estrutura de nível mundial, em termos de segurança, reliability. Então, eu não acho que a gente tem que buscar reinventar a roda com relação ao que já existe. Agora, a gente precisa, como o Antti falou aqui, tomar decisões sobre essa questão, não olhando pelo retrovisor, mas olhando pelo que a estrada está apontando ali pela frente. Que foi um pouco o que a Estônia fez, como a gente ouviu da Lia, E no caso da Estônia, acho que ainda era mais interessante, porque não tinha nem estrada para olhar, era um matagal, assim. Eles tiveram que inventar a estrada eles mesmos, né? Eles tiveram que abrir ali no mato o caminho e fizeram na raça aquilo acontecer. Então, a situação que a gente está hoje é uma situação muito mais confortável, porque a gente já está no momento em que há modelos testados. Eu acho que o modelo da Índia, Estônia, British Columbia e vários outros países que estão trabalhando essa identidade, o Uruguai, como a gente viu hoje, isso já é um ativo muito importante para o Brasil, porque a gente já tem lições consolidadas. E junte-se a esse coquetel, isso que o Antti acabou de falar sobre identidades autossoberanas, a chegada da blockchain, a emergência de padrões como identificadores descentralizados e outros avanços que a gente está encontrando hoje, e a gente tem, na verdade, uma belíssima de uma oportunidade de poder, de uma tacada, resolver esses problemas que a gente diagnosticou aqui, e, na outra, poder estar na vanguarda do debate do que significa pensar uma identidade digital em 2018. Então, quando a Índia pensou em identidade digital, eu acho o modelo indiano brilhante, só que era 2009. A Estônia pensou, inclusive, antes disso. Hoje a gente está em 2018. Então, a gente pode olhar não só para o que já existe, mas também para o que vem por aí. Então, eu acho que misturar as três coisas é importante para a tomada de decisão. E eu acho que, se a gente fizer isso, a gente pode colocar o país numa espécie de vanguarda. Eu gosto sempre de dizer que uma coisa que não falta no Brasil, né, que a gente tem em abundância, é burocracia. E isso é um ambiente muito propício para que o país se torne o líder mundial de tecnologias anti-burocracia. Porque, na medida em que a gente resolve os problemas de burocracia que a gente tem no nosso país, a gente vai estar resolvendo os problemas de burocracia do mundo inteiro. A gente vai poder ter startups, vai poder ter empresas de logísticas, de processos, etc., que vão poder, inclusive, oferecer soluções para fora do país. Então, eu acho que o nosso desafio hoje é transformar o nosso limão numa belíssima de uma limonada com gelo, açúcar, se der, ainda colocamos um pouquinho de cachaça, porque aí ainda vira uma caipirinha, entendeu? É isso.
Boa. Uma pergunta para a Lia e para o Antti, acho que é mais uma consultoria para o Brasil. Considerando que a gente tem todas essas identidades aqui, inclusive algumas super seguras, como o do caso do TSE, que tem dados biométricos e tal, na visão de vocês, o que deveria ser o próximo passo para o governo brasileiro utilizar essa identidade que já existe? O Ronaldo trouxe o certificado digital, que tem 5 milhões, mas a gente tem um TSE com quase 100 milhões. Então, se a gente decidisse pelo TSE como a identidade mais segura, o que deveria acontecer depois para que o governo fosse mais digital do que é hoje, considerando que a gente tem um volume enorme de pessoas já cadastradas e incluídas no sistema?
Okay, para mim, I think that I will stick to English. I can't switch between languages. I can speak Portuguese or English, but I think it's good also for you to understand. So, I think that as both Estonia and Finland are small countries, President Ilves said in the morning that everything that can be done in small countries can be scaled technically to big countries. But problems comes with having to negotiate with so many people, and the political will, getting that in bigger context is always harder. So that's why I kind of hear what you say, that there should be unification of having one portal and one document and so forth. But on the other hand, from practical point of view, I think that in bigger country it might be better to really give power also for smaller units to try out. Learning by doing, what Lia said, is so important now, to do something and gain learning And if that's being done on the level of Brazil, everything, it's very slow, the learning process. So at least in the learning phase, I think it would be good to have power in smaller units, let's say a city level, find like spearhead what's the most digital city in Brazil and start advancing there. But then at the same time, kind of the tricky part is how to avoid then this complete chaos that everybody does differently. So having kind of strong vision that there we want to go together, but start doing it like in parallel in many places. That's my thinking.
Today morning, there was a touching story of a woman struggling to get identity. And I was thinking maybe we need to introduce like a constitutional rights for our people, human beings, to have identity. To have an identity is, of course, very, very basic. And since in Brasilia, in your country you have already several identities, I think you should make some inventory and use the data you have already. For example, in Estonia, our identity system is based on population register. We register our citizen, and we use this historic moment in Estonia. When we got independence, we introduced our own currency, and people had a right to have Estonian crowns for every family member. And this was a motive for citizens to register themselves. And we use this information to start our population register. And after that, our population register and personal identification code are the most important factors. We created our digital ID system. So be smart and use what you have already and bring different parties together to decide how to proceed. Make this decision and then go ahead.
Tem uma pergunta aqui da plateia sobre o quanto a burocracia ajuda ou facilita a corrupção. E eu me lembro, 3 anos atrás, eu tive a oportunidade de conhecer o governo estoniano e tinha uma frase do primeiro-ministro que dizia que para computador você não consegue dar propina. Vocês acham de fato que o aspecto de corrupção prejudica essa evolução rápida desse tema ou o ecossistema de alguma maneira vai corrigir isso no tempo e acabar com a corrupção? Porque, como disse o ex-presidente da Estônia, para o computador você não consegue dar propina, né?
Definitely, electronic services, this kind of automatization, it helps to reduce corruption. In Estonia, as compared with other countries who have been under this authoritarian rule, we are less corrupt country, but there is other opportunities still there to have corruption on some city governments. And most dangerous type of corruption is political corruption. If your politicians are not following public interest, but some kind of hidden private interest. And this is, I think, an important issue for political and for democracy to find ways to fight political and high-level corruption. And this is mainly about democracy, how to develop a transparent political system, how party finances is organizing, how political campaign is like other some clear rules how to conduct campaigning. These are also very important issues for democracy. My role, everyday role, is not to advocate digital identity or I am not expert on digital identity. My task is to advise and to encourage use of technology for democracy.
I may be a little bit more pessimistic because I know that human beings are very resourceful, especially Brazilians are very resourceful in going around. So if there is some system which makes corruption harder, it makes it harder in one place, but that's not the root cause of the problem, are not in the system. So I was living here in Brazil back in 2005, and now reflecting like the discussions, maybe it's also because I'm in different environments, but my feeling is that it's much more vividly discussed in the society now, the corruption, than it was back 13 years ago. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's equally discussed back then. But what I hear quite much is this general feeling that jeito brasileiro, não pode fazer nada, é assim. So people just think that it's kind of normal and cultural. People complain. It's nobody with whom I talk is like, yeah, that's good, we have corruption. But people complain a lot, much more now than 13 years ago. But still the energy that goes to complaints is kind of wasted. It's good to have the discussion. I think that it's happening in all over the world that corruption is becoming less and less, but it's a long journey. And I don't believe that the computers make the way. So it's cultural change that is in everyone. So.
Esse ponto é muito importante. Você tem um ponto, eu acho que, de fato, os seres humanos são incríveis em formas de achar, vamos dizer, outros jeitos de continuar a perpetuar coisas erradas, mas eu acho que a tecnologia tem um papel fundamental, inclusive no combate à corrupção. E uma das formas que isso vai poder acontecer, eu acho que é muito claro. Por exemplo, pensa só em coisas muito importantes que o Brasil já construiu do ponto de vista de tecnologia. Por exemplo, a nota fiscal eletrônica. Isso é algo que eu acho que é singular e importante aqui no Brasil e subutilizado do ponto de vista de infraestrutura de informação. Por quê? Porque hoje, com a infraestrutura da nota fiscal eletrônica, você consegue enxergar de forma granular tudo que é adquirido no país todo. Se você aplicasse um sistema de inteligência artificial na parte da nota fiscal que diz respeito ao que foi adquirido, ou seja, não são dados pessoais, é o nome do produto e o valor que ele foi pago por ele, a data e o lugar onde ele foi comprado. Você conseguiria algo extraordinário, que é medir em tempo real flutuações de preço, de mercado, inclusive nas cidades de interior do país. Isso é uma ferramenta de controle, por exemplo, para a gestão do poder público, inacreditável, que te permitiria, inclusive, descentralizar e aumentar, vamos dizer, a autonomia das cidades ou dos estados para fazerem compras e participarem do Pacto Federativo de uma outra forma, desde que seguissem o indicador de preço, que é medido em tempo real com relação àquela zona, região geográfica, etc. Então, isso que eu estou dando aqui é um exemplo simplório, é um exemplo simples do tipo de medida que a gente pode fazer para pensar o país com gestão de informação. Então, eu acho que a tecnologia nunca vai acabar com a criatividade humana para descobrir brechas, etc. Mas que ela pode tornar a coisa bem mais difícil, isso eu não tenho a menor dúvida.
Muito bom. A gente está com 13 minutos para encerrar. Vou emendar duas perguntas direto e eu acredito que a gente já consegue finalizar. A primeira pergunta: o que vocês acham que é o papel da iniciativa privada na transformação digital de um país? E a segunda, mais provocando o futuro, pensando nos próximos 100 anos, vocês acreditam que um dia a gente vai ter um ID mundial a ponto da gente ser cidadão do mundo e não de um país? Então, acho que e o que viria junto com isso de mudanças para nossas sociedades aí mundo afora? Então, as duas perguntas para a gente encerrar.
questions to answer. Okay. So, first question was about. Oh,
O papel da iniciativa
okay.
privada.
Advice to your country. Yeah. Oh, role of private sector. I think the role of private sector is to create demand. First, to show that actually e-government is needed for businesses. And second, to provide assistance to build e-government systems. Okay. And the question about future, who knows?
Okay, role of the private sector in government. I tend to think it from the perspective that the word governance, that's needed everywhere. It's not only in the states or countries. Governance is needed in the companies, it's needed in private sector as well. And many of these solutions, as well as problems what we have, like with digital identity, they are equally and even maybe more useful, quickly useful on the private sector. So how to make digital services on private sector, it's same thing. So I think that private sector is agile in movements, and government, on the other hand, having the legislative power, can be the stabilizing force there, that the markets don't get crazy to all directions. So I think these both having hand in hand is really important. What was the second question? It was about the future and AI coming and ruling the world or something like that. So actually, that's an interesting question for me, because I'm chasing jobs, and I'm going to be working with artificial intelligence in Finland, trying to boost the companies taking it now. And that's super hyped, even more hyped than blockchain. And this is also terrible. I'm looking to the journalist corner there. So whenever there is a story about artificial intelligence, nowadays it has at least 2 of these Robocop images, which is completely mad and out of anything in the reality. So the artificial intelligence questions what we have now, they are very much more mundane. It can make miracles already in some areas, but moving towards this general artificial intelligence, I'm not the one to guess how long time it takes, but I'm quite much on the side of so-called safe AI people who think that if it's coming, if it's happening, we can prepare for it somehow to make it beneficial for humankind, because it cannot be done afterwards. So it's such a big thing that we should think carefully. I mean, there is a petition going on now, for example, banning AI weapons, which is just like it has to happen, because if there starts arms race in these flying drones that can kill everybody who has a beard, that's the thing that we really need to act, and that's something that maybe this general kind of panicking with the Robocop images in the journalism is kind of mixing these 2 worlds. What can be done with AI now in the business? It's completely different story about these killer robots, but for those we should also be conscient and do some kind of regulations.
Bom, com relação à primeira pergunta, o papel do setor privado é fundamental. Primeira coisa, a gente precisa enxergar o setor privado na sua complexidade contemporânea. Então, o setor privado, ele tem que ser considerado não só na figura da firma, né, para usar um termo do Coase, da empresa, da corporação, etc., mas também do ponto de vista das redes colaborativas, muitas delas descentralizadas, que hoje são capazes de fazer projetos de envergadura global. É só pensar blockchain. Blockchain, muitas das blockchains que a gente opera são não proprietárias. Então, esse é um tipo de cooperação que envolve infraestrutura, software, serviços, que muitas vezes são prestados desse tipo de modelo descentralizado, e mais do que isso, padrões, né, os standards, por exemplo, os identificadores descentralizados e outros modelos, são também ativos que a gente tem que considerar. Então, eu considero esse papel absolutamente importante e cheio de oportunidades. Mais do que isso, na colaboração com o setor privado, o setor público passa a ter novos desafios, especialmente quando a gente está falando de tecnologia da informação. E eu vou dar 2 desses desafios. Primeiro é que, quando o gestor público vai fazer projetos de tecnologia da informação, ele vai precisar pensar em coisas novas que ele não tinha que pensar em outros projetos, como, por exemplo, projetos de infraestrutura. Um deles, propriedade intelectual. Como é que você faz a decisão sobre como propriedade intelectual vai ser gerido em um determinado projeto de tecnologia da informação? Então, esse é um ponto. Segundo, igualmente importante, gestão de dados. Se eu sou gestor público e vou fazer uma parceria público-privada, eu preciso decidir como é que os dados serão geridos. Quem vai ter acesso aos dados, de que forma, em que medida e assim por diante. Então, esses são desafios novos, que a gestão pública precisa se preparar, inclusive, para lidar com eles. Mas, uma vez que eles estão mapeados, eu acho que a gente tem que fazer o máximo possível para buscar resultados, e esse tipo de parceria eu acho que é fundamental. Com relação à pergunta do futuro, eu também não sei dizer, eu acho que é muito difícil prever o que está para acontecer. O que dá para entender apenas é você extrapolar tendências que a gente está vivendo hoje, para você tentar, ao máximo, capturar as oportunidades que essas tendências apresentam. Então, eu vejo hoje 2 tendências que são fundamentais para a gente pensar o futuro imediato, inclusive a construção de um novo modelo de desenvolvimento do país. Eu acho que ninguém aqui discordaria de que o modelo de desenvolvimento do país está esgotado e que a gente vai precisar, como sociedade, criar um novo modelo de desenvolvimento pensando no que vem por aí. E, obviamente, informação e tecnologia da informação não pode ficar de fora disso. Então, 2 tendências que eu acho que são importantes para pensar. A primeira é inteligência artificial, em que a gente tem exemplos hoje muito interessantes de países que estão priorizando aplicações nessa área. Um deles, os Estados Unidos, outro, por exemplo, a China. Amanhã a gente vai ouvir o Ben Ku, que está aqui conosco, que é professor da Universidade de Tsinghua e um dos especialistas nessa questão, e eu acho que ele pode falar um pouco sobre a experiência dele com isso. E eu acho que a gente tem que, no mínimo, se posicionar. Eu acho que não podemos, como país, ignorar que isso está acontecendo. Então, no mínimo, você precisa de ter um posicionamento sobre como isso vai afetar o desenvolvimento presente e futuro. E a segunda oportunidade que eu vejo de tendências atuais que podem escalar é a blockchain. Eu acho que a gente está num momento do blockchain que, como o Antti falou, lembra a internet em 1993. Ainda não surgiu, no âmbito de blockchains, uma figura como o Sir Tim Berners-Lee, que criou a chamada web, né, a World Wide Web. Você tinha internet em 93, mas você não tinha web, que foi o que permitiu esse salto que a gente vive hoje de conectividade, porque ele conseguiu criar um modelo de interoperabilidade entre tudo aquilo que estava acontecendo. Eu não vejo hoje ainda o surgimento de uma web para o blockchain. Vai acontecer? Sim, talvez não vai ser uma pessoa, talvez vai ser um processo incremental, mas eu estou vendo cada vez mais uma preocupação em que a gente possa dar um salto grande também nessas tecnologias. E o Brasil não pode ficar de fora, porque a verdade é o seguinte, em blockchain hoje, não tem um líder dominante, não tem um Facebook da blockchain, não tem um Google do blockchain. O entrante tem condições mutatis mutandis de competir com quem está na ponta. Então, isso gera ali uma oportunidade muito grande e que eu acho que a gente não pode perder mais essa janela, né? Nós perdemos já a janela de desenvolvimento dos semicondutores, nós perdemos a janela de desenvolvimento da própria internet, né, da Web 1.0, perdemos a janela da Web 2.0, das conexões de redes sociais, etc. Estamos trabalhando para não perder a oportunidade de IoT, de internet das coisas. O Brasil tem um plano de internet das coisas que foi lançado agora, inclusive do qual eu participei na formulação. Então, não podemos perder, nos darmos ao luxo de não participarmos no pensamento da inteligência artificial e no pensamento do blockchain. Então, eu acho que é isso que dá para extrapolar com relação ao futuro.
I will make one more comment because it was mentioned in the earlier panel that this is very typical setting of white middle-aged men doing the planning of the future in these tech events. So that's something that it's really need to be taken into consideration, especially with artificial intelligence. There is lots of literature that you can automate the inequalities of the society. If you have some inequalities, you take the data and you just scale it up to everywhere. So it's having the mind of also not being super geeky always about just the technological opportunities, but step back and invite people that are not here today.
Agradeço a vocês.